بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين وعلى آله وأصحابه الطاهرين ما دام ما في السماوات والأرضين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما اللهم إنا نسألك علما ينفعنا اللهم إنا نسألك علما نافعا ورزقا واسعا وعملا متقبلا وشفاء من كل داء نوينا التعلم والتعليم والتذكر والتذكير والإفادة والاستفادة والحث على التمسك بكتاب الله وسنة رسوله صلى الله عليه وآله وصحبه وسلم وبعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. Alhamdulillah, by the grace and mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in our last week's discussion we had started off looking at the ma'qud alayh, the contracted item. The contracted item refers to either the commodity or it refers to the price. There are certain conditions that relate to the commodity, there are certain conditions that relate to the price in order for the sale to be valid. We had very interesting conditions. The first condition being that the item that you are buying and selling must be ritually pure. The Arabic terminology in that regard is referred to as tahirul ayn or tahir. Tahir, it must be ritually pure. The second condition we looked at, which is a very interesting condition, is that when you sell something, that particular item, it must have a utility. If it doesn't have a utility and you spend money in lieu of that, that is considered a form of wastage. Today, inshallah, bi'idhnillah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we beseech Allah to cause us to benefit and to grant us the tawfiq. Today, in one of our classes, we came across the definition of the term tawfiq. What does tawfiq mean? One of the definitions given is khalqullah qudrat at-ta'ati fil abd. When Allah creates the ability for a slave to be obedient within the slave, that is called tawfiq. Some other scholars mention, they say that tawfiq refers to ilm and amal, that Allah embellishes you with the knowledge, then Allah enables you to practice upon that knowledge. That is tawfiq. So we pray and we beseech that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us tawfiq, sound knowledge, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala enable us to practice upon that particular sound knowledge in a way that we are able to benefit optimally, both in this world as well as in the hereafter. So ashartu thalith, the third condition. First condition was it must be pure, the commodity or its counter value. The second condition, it must have a utility. The third condition reads as follows: أن يكون المعقود عليه مقدورا على تسليمه. The item that you are selling, one of the conditions that we're going to discuss in a moment would be that you must be the owner. You cannot sell something that belongs to somebody else. So you're the owner of a given item, but you're unable to hand it over. It's not permissible for you to sell such an item. You may be the bona fide owner, you are the registered owner, but you're unable to hand it over. It's not permissible for you to sell such an item. An example will come soon, inshallah. في بعض الأحيان نجد أن البائع يملك ما يريد بيعه. We find in certain instances that the seller, he is the owner of what he intends to sell. However, for some reason or the other, غير قادر على تسليم المبيع إلى المشتري. He is unable to hand over the commodity to the buyer. وعدم قدرة البائع على تسليم المبيع. The fact that the seller is unable to hand over the commodity, there can be a legal reason for it, and there can be a very practical reason for it. So the first reasoning we're going into would be the practical reasons. أمر حسي, a practical reason. What is the practical reason? كأن فقد المبيع. That I have a phone, I placed the phone somewhere at home. I don't know exactly where's the phone is lost. That lost phone, who does it belong to? It belongs to me. Can I sell that phone to you? No, not because I'm not the owner of the phone, but I'm unable to hand the phone over to you, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. أو وإما يعود عدم قدرة البائع على التسليم إلى أمر اعتباري. It could be for some other consideration, like a legal consideration. And what would that example be? مثل أن يكون المبيع مرهونا. So I borrow money from you. I borrow 10,000 rands. You more than willing to lend the money to me, but you want a security. So you ask for a collateral. So I'm borrowing 10,000 rands from you, and I place my phone by you as a collateral. When I settle the debt, I repay the 10,000 rands, you're going to return the phone to me. So who does the phone belong to? The phone belongs to me, but I'm placing it as a collateral. Whilst that item serves as a collateral, can I sell it on to somebody else? Our scholars say no. Why? Because legally, you're not in a position to hand over that phone, despite the fact that you own the phone. Why? You must first settle your 10,000 rands, settle your debt. The phone is returned to you. Now you can sell the phone. But for as long as it's placed as a collateral, it's not permissible for you to sell the phone. Why? Because you don't have the ability legally to hand the phone over, and Allah SWT knows best. So this is very, very important. It will come later on also some relevance to a chapter which is coming later, a sub-chapter, and that is, and this is very important just from a business perspective. As a business person, ultimately the reward that you're going to get for being a upright business person from an Islamic perspective is the Prophet ﷺ promises that you will be with the martyrs. In other words, it's a very high rank. You will be with the martyrs. So when it comes to business, you as a seller, you want to fulfill your obligation as a seller. And if you're buying, you want to fulfill your obligation as a buyer, that exchange of wealth. So there's a chapter which is coming later, which we're going to talk about selling that which you have not taken possession of. It ties into this particular phenomenon. So, بَيْءُ مَا لَمْ يُقْبَضْ or بَيْءُ مَا لَمْ يَقْبِضِ الْمُشْتَرِي. I purchased the item from you. I've paid you for the item belongs to me, but I haven't taken possession thereof. There's a prohibition that you shouldn't sell it. Why? Because you don't have the item in your control. So you may have paid for the item and everything, but now you sell it on. By the time when you go collect the item, something or the other happens to it. So it also teaches some sort of like responsibility from the seller's perspective. You sell something which you have in your possession and which you're able to hand over. If you didn't have it in your possession, you're unable to hand it over, and it can potentially create complications. Now, الشرط الرابع. So that basically covers the third condition, which relates to the ability to hand something over. If you don't have the ability to hand the commodity over, it is not valid to sell that particular item. الشرط الرابع أن يكون المعقود عليه مملوكا للعاقد. So you see how these two tie together. The one is that you are the owner and you must be able to hand the commodity over. The next condition is أن يكون المعقود عليه, the contracted item. I'm selling this phone to you. مملوكا للعاقد أو لمن ناب العاقد عنه. The item that is being sold, it must belong to the contracting party or whomsoever the contracting party is representing. So I'm an estate agent. I don't own the house, but I've been authorized by the owner to sell the house. So the person contracting, he must either own the commodity or he must be authorized by the bona fide owner of the commodity. And Allah SWT knows best. So it's very important. أن يكون المعقود عليه مملوكا للعاقد فمن يبيع ما لا يملكه وقت العقد وليس له ولاية ولا وكاية يسمى فضوليا ولا يصح بيعه. So our scholars, they, when you're dealing with the wealth of somebody else, it's on one of two bases. Either because of wilaya, a person has guardianship over the other person. So for example, I have a minor son. The minor son has wealth. Can I administer the wealth of my minor son? Yes. Why? Because I have guardianship. Allah SWT has given me that wilaya, that guardianship over my son. And because of my overwhelming goodwill for my son, I am licensed to trade on his behalf. So he has a property, I can sell the property and purchase another property on his behalf. So that's the one way that you can be dealing with another person's wealth. The second, which is a more common one, would be Mawla Yahya doesn't own this phone. This phone belongs to me. But if I appoint Mawla Yahya as an agent to sell the phone on my behalf, so he doesn't own the phone, but he's been authorized as an agent. Those are the only two instances, generally, whereby other than the owner is authorized to deal in the wealth of the person, either by guardianship or either by agency, and Allah SWT knows best. Now, I'm just thinking of an example now. A person is declared insolvent, so his goods are attached. Who attaches his goods? It's a court of law. The sheriff will come and attach his goods. So that is the judge, what we refer to in Islamic paradigm. He has a form of guardianship. Not necessarily the familial one, like a father over the son, but he has the wilaya al-amma. He has a general and broad sense of guardianship, and that basically licenses him to do things like that. It happens in Islamic law, it happens in a normal, conventional, in a Western country, they would have this particular facility within the law. So they have a right to do that, and Allah SWT knows best. A person who, in our fiqh terminology, we have a terminology for a person who administers the wealth of another person. It's called a fuduli. In other words, a person who is administering the wealth of another without guardianship or agency is called a fuduli. Right? I'm just thinking now, I don't know how relevant it is, but a gatecrasher, like a gatecrasher, you can use the term fuduli for him also. Because now he's, if you're invited, so when you're invited to a wedding, it's not a contract, but there's a construct for it. When you're invited to a wedding, the host is permitting you to partake of whatever has been prepared for the guest. In Arabic, they refer to it as ibaha. You permitted. There's no contract whereby the guest makes you the owner of whatever has been prepared in terms of food stuff, etc. But he's made permissible for you to partake of those. Now, a person who comes uninvited is a great crasher. So he's accessing that which he doesn't actually have permission to access. And Allah SWT knows best. Now, ولهذا الشرط تطبيق واقعي في حكم بيع المرابحة التي تبناها بعض البنوك كبناء لعملية تمويل شراء البيوت. This particular condition, and that is that you must own that which you are selling. It has an application in a particular product that certain Islamic banks offer, and that product is referred to as murabaha. The question, murabaha is going to be something which we consider permissible, despite the fact that there is a critique leveled at the product. One of the critiques leveled at the product is that at the time of the contract, the bank selling a property that the bank owns? That's a question mark. So when we discuss bay'ul murabaha, we will discuss that. But to put your mind at ease from the outset, it is something which we consider to be permissible, but doesn't mean it's permissible. Constructive criticism cannot be leveled at the product in that particular spirit. So one of the questions that people generally ask about the murabaha model would be that at the point of contract, does the bank own the property, or is the bank yet to acquire the property? And then, so is the bank selling something that it owns, or is it selling something that it doesn't own at the time of the contract? I also want to know space. We'll look at that when we get to murabaha. Ash-shartu al-khamis. Ash-shartu al-khamis. We're now looking at the fifth condition. Hey, we're going through these conditions rather quickly, Mullah Hamza, Mullah Yahya. Ash-shartu al-khamis.
Do we have a chapter on murabaha?
On murabaha, if my memory serves me, then we do speak to the issue of murabaha. Not as a chapter. I think perhaps when we look at either a loan or when we look at the whole phenomenon of interest. For example, interest is when I lend you like 1,000 rands and then you repay me 1,000 rands plus interest, the principal amount plus interest. So I demand, Allah protect, that you return the principal amount of 1,000, but I want 250 extra. The 250 is interest. So when you go to a conventional bank and you secure a home loan, they lend you 1,000,000 rands and then you repay 1,000,000 rands plus interest over time. But now when you go to an Islamic bank, like Al-Barakah by way of example, and they have a number of products. One of the products would be Al-Murabaha. So you enter into that contract. What is a contract? It's not a usurious loan, because it's not a loan from the outset. It's a sale. They purchase it at a particular price and they resell it to you at a profit. It's a sale. The foundation is a sale. So there we discuss this particular phenomenon. If my memory serves me correctly, we'll discuss it over there and get a little bit into it. So ashartul khamis, the fifth condition. The fifth condition reads as follows: أَيَكُونَ الْمَعْقُودَ عَلَيْهِ مَعْلُومًا مِنْ كُلِّ جِهَةٍ. This is a very important phenomenon, and maybe certain of the other conditions are like a given, they are to be found. But this particular condition, more often than not, we find there's a discrepancy here. And that is when we sell something, then the price must be known and the commodity must be known. And this relates to all type of contracts. At the point of the contract, so if you're working per hour, for example, then your hourly rate must be known. Yeah, thinking about myself and Mln Yahya, it's important, and it's something that what happens when we have a good relationship with somebody. We say that that's a it's a secondary issue which we will get to. We'll cross the bridge when we get there. I heard that when we'll cross the bridge when we get there. That's one. But I was sitting in a meeting, and there's another one that gives the same idea. It says, for those of us who are in Cape Town, South Africa, Sea Point. Now, Sea Point is on the beachfront, and you go swim there. So the one brother didn't say, we'll cross the bridge when we get there. He says, we're on our way to Sea Point. We'll put on our bikinis when we get there. Like one of the brothers said, to kill two birds with one stone. So the brother said, let's not say to kill two birds with one stone. That sounds violent. So what we do is we do two things at one time. So now what happens is you have a choice now. You can say we're going to cross the bridge when we get there, or you say we're on our way to Sea Point. I must get used to it, man. So therefore I can articulate it that well. We're on our way to Sea Point. We'll put on our bikinis when we get there. So what happens is we say that because I know you, so I'm not going to concern myself over the service and the remuneration. So it's going to be mentioned in the text. So that's the reason we say we're not going to concern ourselves, with talking about the price or talking about the remuneration now. Because we're brothers. That is the very reason why the Sharia tells you, because of your brotherhood, to secure your brotherhood, to sustain that brotherhood, the Sharia tells you that from the outset, this mustn't become a point that we were friends up until this stage, and then we have some sort of interaction. In other words, like I lend you, you borrow from me, or I employ your services and I need to pay for your services. When we come at that particular juncture, and then things go south, things go pear-shaped. It shouldn't be like that. And it happens like that because we don't follow through on the Sharia. So, Ashartul Kham is when you're selling something, right? Then the commodity and the counter value, it must be known. I'm selling this phone to you for 10,000 rands. So you know exactly what you're going to receive. As the buyer, you're going to receive the phone. And in lieu of the commodity, I'm going to receive 10,000 rands. It must be known. The commodity and the counter value must be known. So أَيَكُونَ الْمَعْقُودَ عَلَيْهِ مَعْلُومًا مِنْ كُلِّ جِهَةٍ, that the contracted item must be known from every angle. In other words, there mustn't be ambiguity. We say, don't worry, I'm going to sort you out. Or what happens is, I say, no, take it. You can sort me out later. Now, it's so ambiguous. You're thinking I'll sort you out later. I say, take it. You can sort me out later. Your sorting out later is that you're going to give me 20,000 rands. You thinking I'm going to buy him in Nando's next week Friday. That's how ambiguous sorting out later is. Very problematic. أعني بذلك أن يكون المعقود عليه معلوم الذات والصفات والقدر. That in terms of the commodity or the counter value, it must be known. I'll give you 100. Let's say there's a number of currencies. Yeah, 100. What are you paying me with? 100 rands, 100 cents, $100. وما ينفي عن المعقود عليه من أن يكون معلوم الذات والصفات والقدر والمقدور على تسليم يسمى غررا. This is a definition I can't remember, but I think I read it somewhere in Ibn Rushd gave this particular definition of what entails uncertainty. So there are two types of uncertainty. There is a contractual uncertainty, and then there's market-related uncertainty. Market-related uncertainty, we refer to it as risk. Risk is part and parcel of trading. Good business people, they take calculated risk. Look, I'm buying this commodity. Inshallah, there's going to be a market for this commodity. So they buy the commodity and they get sellers and they realize a profit. So market-related risk is something which is encouraged. I'm not saying encouraged as you must create market-related risk. No, it is something that as a business person you must embrace. You take the risk, and the risk becomes part of what justifies a profit at the end of the day. But contractual related risk is problematic. Where the contract in and of itself is risky. What do you mean the contract is risky? The contract is risky in the sense that you paying for something that you might get or you might not get. Right? Or you're handing over something and the counter value, the price, you might get it, you might not get it. So that type of uncertainty we refer to as gharar. So anything which, that puts the price or the counter value in the balance, you don't know what you're getting, either the buyer or the seller, that is basically referred to as gharar. And gharar is a very important phenomenon within Islamic contract law. If you were to look like on an executive summary level of the don'ts when it comes to Islamic contract law, like on a macro level, then the don'ts would be two really. It would be riba and gharar. So from the outset, if you want to look at a given contract and you want to see, look here, this contract, is it valid or not? You're going to look at two things. Number one is it usurious? And then it's a no-no. That's an undesirable from the Sharia perspective. And the other one would be gharar, uncertainty. Contractual uncertainty, not market-related uncertainty, contractual uncertainty. I sell you a bird in the sky. So you're going to pay me, but what are the chances of we actually going to catch that bird or not? You with me? So, وَمَا يَنْفِي عَنِ الْمَعْقُودَ عَلَيْهِ, that which negates from the commodity or the counter value, the contract item, أَيَكُونَ مَعْلُومًا, that it is known in terms of its, this car, for example, and its qualities are unknown, or the extent, the amount is unknown, or you don't know whether the person is able to hand it over or not. You're paying for it, but you don't know whether you're going to get the commodity, whether the person is able to hand it over. يُسَمَّى غَرَرًا. This is referred to as uncertainty. It's referred to as gharar. وَقَدْ نَهَى رَسُولُ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ عَنْ بَيْعِ الْغَرَرِ. And the Prophet ﷺ, he prohibited from the uncertainty sale. If I'm looking now back, I'm thinking, to structure it in this particular way, it's not normally your sort of like fiqhi perspective of it, but to give you a broad idea, just in terms of principle, what to look at. When you're buying an item, you know exactly what you're getting in. It's important. It's very important. So one is the legal dynamic, and we were speaking to like a practical dynamic. I remember many years back, the sale was valid. I bought a computer, and I ordered the computer online. So they had all of the specs, and I had the pick. So when the computer arrived in Cape Town, then it was exactly the computer I bought. But I didn't expect the computer, the laptop to, the pick. I couldn't reconcile between the pick and what I had with me. You're with me? I couldn't reconcile between the, it's not a fiction. I wouldn't have any grounds to return the laptop, because primarily the laptop is based on spec and the pick. And then I saw an ad when I was teaching Islamic Contract Law at Darul Naim. I saw an ad, and the person posted a few pics on a second-hand car. And then he said, I'm not selling the car until or unless you come to view the car, because the pics, this person was very honest. He says the pics make the car look better than what it actually is. You follow me? I'm not talking about the legal dynamics of it. I'm talking from a practical perspective, that if you're on a micro level, you're buying something, make sure you know exactly what you're buying. It goes a long way. And sometimes it's just a matter of making an extra effort to look here, I need to see the item, and then you see the item, and then you make the choice. And Allah SWT knows the space. But from a legal perspective, if there's any contractual related risk, you don't know what you're getting at the end of the day, because you don't know. The guy tells you, I'm looking for a laptop. I got a laptop for you. How much is the laptop? 3,000 rands. Finish. It's problematic, because you paid 3,000 for a laptop. You don't know what the specs of the laptop are. You don't know what the make of the laptop is, and so forth. That becomes very problematic. That's an example of there's too much risk. Look, there's a degree of risk that is tolerable. But when it becomes intolerable, then the Sharia says that that's not permissible. You cannot eliminate contractual risk altogether, like absolutely zero. Otherwise, it wouldn't be permissible for me to sell you something on credit. So I sell you the phone, and we agree upon a price, so you get the commodity. There's a risk that I may not receive my 10,000 rands, but it's still permissible. It's permitted because that's the nature of business, at least in certain fields, that people buy on credit and take things on credit. Further, Hussein.
In regards to that, so what if we have a situation where a commodity is ma'aloom, partial of it is ma'aloom and others is ma'aloom? So, example would be what the children buy this Kinder Joy. So, in the Kinder Joy, you get a toy.
Yeah.
But the toy has it's closed, so it has question marks, so you don't know what you get. And on the other side, there's like a little type of pudding with, chocolate in it. So the children generally, the intention is that they want a toy. So there's something which is ma'aloom, that there's this pudding, but there's also this benefit now of the toy.
Yeah.
So in that regard, we would find ourselves in that contact over there.
Look, so basically the Kinder Joy, and I think most people will be familiar with Kinder Joy. I think it's an international commodity. Wherever you go, you find like a Kinder Joy. So the commodity is made up of two parts. The one is the treat, which is the chocolate, and the other one is that the other treat, which is like a form of a toy. So the way around it for me would be that you construct it in a way that the purchase is for the treat, in other words, the chocolate, and then the other is just like a gift. Yeah, like with every Kinder Joy that you purchase, you just get that. If you're able to construct it in a particular way, and then the objection falls on the wayside, because then they would say that the fact that you don't know what the treat is like, but the treat is tabi' and the matbu', and that is known. So you apply different set of rules to a secondary issue as opposed to the primary issue. And Allah SWT knows best. Now that would be one way of looking at it. I actually didn't think about it in that particular way, because kids love the Kinder Joy, and it's positioned as such in the supermarkets that if you have young kids, then inevitably they're going to come out there with a Kinder Joy. Barakallahu fiqh. So the important principle here that we've introduced in terms of condition number 5 would be that there shouldn't be any contractual risk, and contractual risk is referred to as gharar. Many times some of our brothers and sisters, they use the term gharar, perhaps maybe not knowing entirely what it refers to. So this opportunity has shed some light on that particular phenomenon, and Allah SWT knows best. So ma'loom that. So we look at the first concept, and that is that the actual item must be known. It must be singled out. In other words, لابد أن يكون المعقود عليه معينا. It is necessary that. So now, from the outset, I would like us to really think about this almost like literally. We're saying that the corporeal must be known. So the example would be, I have a number of phones. I say to you, I sell you one of my phones for 10,000 rands. That sale wouldn't be valid. Why? Because I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 phones. Which phone are you buying? No? So here we're saying that the corporeal, the item must be, in English they refer to it as in rem, I-N-R-E-M. Item must be in rem. In other words, a specific item. And this is traditionally, particularly in yesteryear, in centuries and years gone by, that generally when you sold an item, that item would be in rem. It wouldn't be an item, a phone. It would be the phone. Okay, I mean, a phone is generic by its very nature, universal and generic by its very nature. They divide goods into two. They talk about fungible and non-fungible goods. So a fungible item would be an item that you can replicate, like a generic, universal. And basically that's the marketplace we find ourselves in today's time. But yesteryear, commodities even belonging to the same genus or the same type, they would be, one unit would differ from the other unit because of the nature and the way it was built. So therefore in yesteryear, one would be particular that this item. So sometimes because of the environment we live in, for us, if you really think about it, when you buy something, you're not really interested in the item. You're interested in an item. I mean, think about a simple purchase. You go into the shop to buy a loaf of bread. You're not really particular about the loaf. It's about a loaf. You're going to buy a 2-liter milk. So it's not like the 2-liter milk. It's a 2-liter milk. That's important to understand. But here we need to almost like take a step backwards. It's like you're going to a shop and everything is handcrafted. And it's like very specific. So no two items are the same. So what are you buying? I'm buying this item. And this is basically primarily what the fiqh speaks to, almost like in general. A lot of the rules apply to that. And therefore, we will have some deliberations in terms of how the nature of things have changed. And therefore, the way we construct our sales should also speak to the reality on the ground, and Allah knows best. But before we get there, let's read through the text, inshallah, بإذن الله سبحانه وتعالى. فلا يجوز بيع أحد السيارات مثلا. I have a number of cars. So I say to you, I'll sell you one of the cars. So I have 3 cars in my garage. I'll sell you one of the cars for 100,000 rands. That's not going to be valid. Why? Because you might think it's a good deal because you're going to get the Ferrari for 100,000 rands. But when I go out, I give you the Kalahari Ferrari for 100,000 rands. So you thought one thing and I'm thinking another thing. So it creates a problem. Now, ولم تعين ما هي بالذات فاحفظ هذا يا طالب الفوز والنجاة فإنه مهم. An important issue. The next issue, what happens is, and I was just thinking about practical issues, and many times, and this question was asked a few times, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best, about, you go into a shop, you're saying the goods must be specific. So what happens is you go into a shop, and now, you go into a shop, a conventional store, any conventional store, you find these bargain boxes, for example, and now the offer is written out there, take any pay for 100 rands. So now you're asking yourself the question, but must it be specific? So the issue is that is just a presentation. So what happens is, and the point which I argued over here is that if you go to the box and they say take any one or any two for 100 rands or for 200 rands, whatever the price may be. So the price is fixed, but they're saying take any. That is the offer. The moment you follow through and you take, your action specifies the goods that you are taking. And then furthermore, when you take it out of the bargain box, that's not the point of sale. The contract isn't enacted there. What happens is you now take the pair of shoes and you go to the teller. At the teller, now is where you enter into a sale agreement. And the teller is the agent. The teller isn't the owner. The teller is operating on behalf of the owner, selling on behalf of the owner, and you are buying. So that's the point of sale. So prior to that, as long as it's in a box, it's any pay. But the moment you take it out of the box, it becomes the specific pay. And by the time you reach the teller, you're taking this pay, and it becomes fixed. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. So this is one of the issues that we mentioned over here. I'm going to read through it quickly, bi'idhnillah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then we will translate as we go along. وَقَدْ تَدْخُلُ دُكَّانًا مِنَ الدَّكَاكِينَ أَوْ سُوقًا مِنَ الْأَسْوَاقِ. Perhaps it is that you may enter into a shop or you enter into a marketplace. وَتَجِدُ مُرَبَّأَ الْبَيْءِ مَمْلُوءًا بِالْأَحْذِيَةِ عَلَى سَبِيلِ الْمِثَالِ. And by way of example, you find that there's a bargain box. The bargain box is filled with shoes or whatever other commodity. بسعر مخفض والإعلان عليه أن تأخذ أي واحد أو الاثنين بسعر معين. And it is at a bargain is a decreased price, or even if it's at a normal price, it's a box full of goods, and there is a notification, there's an advertisement. What does the advertisement read as? You can take any pay or any 2 pays for a particular price. فتلاحظ أن ثمن معين. So what you notice is that the price is fixed. أما المبيع فيبدو لأول وهلة. At the first instance, it appears that the commodity is not specified. فما الحكم الشرعي في هذا البيع? What is the ruling in this particular regard? أقول وبالله التوفيق ما زالت الأحذية في المربع فهي غير معين لا شك. As long as the shoes are in the box, then it's not specified. Any 2, any pay. ولكن عندما تخرج ما تريد شراءه من المربع أو بعبارة أدق عندما تختار حذاء أو حذاءين من المربع يتعين المبيع بإخراجك أو اختيارك فأصبح المبيع معينا. The moment you choose and you take a pay, and then the pay becomes specified because you're taking that particular pay, so you can't come afterwards and say that you sold me something unspecified and therefore the sale was invalid. By you choosing and singling out a pay, you have specified the commodity. وهذا الحكم بناء على أن العموم من عوارض الألفاظ لا من الأفعال فالأفعال بطبيعته معينة ومعينة. That is, wording can be general, like a pair. But the moment I tell you take a pair of shoes. So you go and you take a pair. The moment you engage in an action by its very nature is specific and it specifies something else. I tell you eat a pie. So in terms of my wording, it can be any pie. So you take any pie, it's fine. Because my wording is general and covers all of the pies. But you can't eat a pie. The moment you engage in eating, it's the pie that you're eating. Right? And Allah SWT knows best. Al-Muhim, the important part in terms of our discussion, and that example, the example was just to create like a discussion point, that might create a degree of clarity. The important point is that as a buyer, when I buy something, I must know what I'm buying in terms of the corporeal, the item, in terms of the quantity, in terms of the extent. I must know all of those things from the buyer's perspective. I must know what I'm buying. The seller, he must know what he's selling and what he's getting in lieu of his sale. He's getting 100 and 200 and that's the important part. The example basically just facilitates for that, and Allah SWT knows best. What do we do? المهم أن يكون المبيع معينا عند العقد والعقد في مثالنا لما يتم وإنما يتم وينعقد غالبا عند عرض المبيع للبائع أو وكيله قبل خروج الزبون من الدكان وهو معين حينئذ لا محالة. So at the end of the day, what happens is, when you choose that item, you haven't bought the item yet. You haven't bought the item yet. So because you haven't bought the item yet, you put it into your trolley, and by putting it in your trolley, it becomes specified. By the time you reach the teller and you place the shoes on the belt and they scan the shoes, now at the point of sale, in other words, it becomes specified and there's no questions about it, and Allah SWT knows best. Before we end off and before we ask for some questions, I think what happens now is we're on 23 now, and if I look, okay, we're about 38 minutes now. So we'll take this last question, inshallah, bring us to 40 minutes, and we'll see what other questions we have, and then we'll conclude for tonight, bi-idhnillah subhanahu wa ta'ala. On, I think we've covered 2 pages, walillah alhamd. I was thinking now about this particular issue. We're saying that when you're in the store and there's a box there and you take it, and what sometimes happens is people fill up trolleys sometimes with things and they push the trolley right up on the teller and they leave it there, and they sometimes for valid reasons, sometimes Allah knows best, maybe for not so valid reasons, person forgot their wallet or everything. They're not going to tell you, hey, you bought all the stuff. The basic, you collected all of the things in your trolley with the intention of buying it, but you didn't buy it as such. What comes to mind is that, when you see an advertisement, let's say like butter going for 45 rands. So that's like a bargain. So now you go to the store and now you don't find the butter in stock. So you want to see the manager because you came to the store to buy that. So that sale, that announcement, was it a valid and binding offer to sell? So generally the stores consider it as such, whether legally or to protect the interest. Because if you can say, they tell out of stock, you say, you can't tell me it's out of stock. Because that advertisement went out this morning, I'm the first customer, how can it be? And in many instances, the seller will actually, even if the stock is run out, they'll give you the same item at the sale price.
Or they give you like a coupon.
Or they give you a coupon or whatever the case may be. But in other words, that generally in the current marketplace, the buyer holds the seller to that particular offer to sell. As like almost like binding the offer to sell. So there's quite a few questions about it if you look at it, the immediacy, because the announcement comes out and then you come in, whatever time you come. But many of these things, the service providers don't do it because they're legally bound to it. Many times they do it, that may be very well a reason, but because of the reputational risk that they may undergo, customer satisfaction in a particular, Allah SWT knows. But something to think about.
Some example that I'm thinking of,
Tafadhalu.
but I thought it might be more appropriate to mention it when we discuss the seal off, and it being that congruency between the buy and sell in terms of what they're agreeing about. But what happens sometimes in the shop is you have a thing is labeled a certain price when you get to the the teller, the scan, it comes out at a different price. Then there's Nizam. And normally they will yield to the customer in that regard, whether or not, because that is where it was on the shelf, that was the price. And even if the price was different, they normally yield to the customer.
Yeah.
But I think that's more a discussion when you're speaking about the CEOL, because you're saying, I'll buy it for this price. And they actually say, well, we're selling it for this price. So then now do you agree on that? But that thing is more like a CEOL. The shopping mall.
But it ties into what we're discussing here primarily in terms of when is the sale enacted. At the time when you reach the teller, that's when you enact the sale. But what's happening is, another aspect would be that there's like a standing, what we're saying here is that there's a standing offer to sell. And that is represented by the price. So by the time you committing from your side, but it's like you're telling the teller that you've already committed to sell. And I'm basically just I'm fulfilling the other part. But now you can't go back on your offer because your offer was at such a price. And now you're telling me that we're going to change it and so forth. Wallahu subhanahu wa ta'ala a'lam.
Entertain this, Mln, that it's as if to say in the mind of the customer, when they're taking it from the basket and that price is there to say, like, this thing is for sale, if you take it, you've basically bought it. And when they walk away, it's almost like they walk away from the majlis. I'm saying that not in reality, but the way the customer treats that action. It's like he walked away from Khiyar Majlis. From the majlis, so there's no khiyar. Now he's almost like compelling the seller, but look, I already took it at this price. When they accept the sale, not in the reality of the contract, almost like subconsciously in the mind of the buyer, they already bought it.
Look, I think that one has to look at the prevailing circumstance. And wallahu a'lam, but it appears to me, I'm talking to the real dynamic of the marketplace, that price, the price tag on a given commodity, that is almost like a standing offer to sell. So when the buyer comes there, he's not buying it at that point, but he's committing to the offer made by the seller at that point, and then he goes through the process of purchasing it at the teller. So that's a very interesting phenomenon. And then labeling is also a very interesting phenomenon. I don't know if it's just in South Africa, but there's big issues about labeling and how sometimes there's a lot of institutional violence in terms of labeling. The people get fleeced because of labels. And if you don't get a discerning buyer, then you could very well, I don't have ready examples at hand, but the fact that they have, there's a Consumer Protection Act, and you have consumer issues on the talk shows and radios and so forth, means it's quite a big issue, and I have this regularly in terms of, and that's the very important issue. We spoke about the ghara, which is uncertainty. I don't know if we spoke to the point already, but we're definitely going to speak to the point about man ghashana falaysa minna. The person who seeks to deceive us are not from amongst us. Those are fairly harsh words from the Prophet ﷺ in terms of a person seeking to dupe another, and that's for monetary gain. No, فَانْبِذْ إِلَيْهِمْ عَلَى سَوَاءٍ. Look, in terms of the generality of the word, it's relevant. That's in a different context altogether in terms of Quran. But to be honest with one another, look here, this is what I'm selling, this is what you're buying. So sometimes the modern workings of the economy, it makes it, people can get away with murder, so to say, in terms of offering certain things and
criteria that they set out in terms of labeling. People find these loopholes. Like one example is like natural and organic.
Yes.
Natural has its own istilah.
Yes.
Compared to organic.
Yes.
Now they put natural on it, thinking that you're buying organic, but it's actually not organic. That's a perfect example.
And then they say caveat emptor, let the buyer beware. So at the end of the day, but I think now that's changed, because in terms of the Consumer Protection Act, it's more let the seller beware, and if you're not disclosing enough, and then it becomes like a problem. Wallahu alam.
One, just for maybe this form of sales worthy of mention.
Bismillah.
Is the sale that Mini gets involved in is the lucky packets type of contract. where you go to these big companies, factories. For example, TFG, they have this, they like the mother of all these companies, retail brands. But then they have all their rejects thrown into boxes, and then it's closed up, and then they sell it to you like for $5,000 for the box. And then you just buy the box. You don't know what you're getting.
You have absolutely no idea what you're getting.
You maybe can discern to some degree, listen, the size of the box is maybe a few electronics in there, like your, this type of thing. But generally you don't. The same in the socks game, like you find a lot of people selling these nice socks. So generally what happens is also the rejects are just thrown into a box. You understand that it's the ma'lum that you know it's a sock. But now the sifa and the cotton, all of these things is now not.
Are they all pairs? Are they or maybe broken? Short.
What's the colors of the socks? What's the thickness of the socks? Is it thin? So that you don't know. So in the same like you're also paying a stipulated amount, which is ma'lum, but the commodity is now not known. And this is something that a lot of people, Muslims also, they get involved in this type of contact.
Quite common amongst workers.
The only sort of like, it's a very interesting issue, and I think we should deliberate about that particular issue. In other words, you're saying that people have rejects, they take all of these rejects and throw it into a box. The box is closed, but there's a standard asking price for each box. But as a buyer, you don't know. You have a broad idea in terms of, it's socks, and it's not going to be handkerchiefs. But what type of socks and what sizes are they, and this and the other, one doesn't know. So just a cut and dry application of the law would render that type of sale invalid. But what's causing me just a bit of to stop there would be the fact that the hawkers, they're going back and they continue to purchase these boxes, means that it's viable at the end of the day in terms of the purchase. So it is something to, not the fact that it is viable or not cuts no ice. That is very important to state. But what is it that actually, the viability, is it because it appears from the outside to be somewhat unknown, but there are enough known elements, because remember that the whole idea of gharar would be when you have a certain degree of gharar, then it renders the contract impossible. But there are certain instances where the gharar is like muhtamal, that is tolerated. So that would be a nice discussion point to look into further. But for now, we're going to conclude on this note. Barakallahu feekum jami'an. And thank you so much for the questions. I really benefit from it in terms of just opening our minds a bit more to look at these contracts. At the end of the day, the important thing is that when we buy something, we know that, look, number one, on the very first level is that, I'm fulfilling your right. I'm buying, I'm giving the money, and you fulfilling my right. I know what I'm getting on that level. And then most importantly is that you're happy, I'm happy, but Allah is also happy in this particular regard. The devil, he made a promise, and his promise is that he's going to waylay man. And he said, I'm going to employ certain stratagems, and also I'm going to focus on certain areas. And he says, وَشَارِكُمْ فِي الْأَمْوَالِ وَالْأَوْلَادِ وَعِدُهُمْ وَمَا يَعِدُهُمُ الشَّيْطَانُ إِلَّا غُرُورًا. The devil mustn't become our partners in what? Our partners when it comes to business. He mustn't be the silent partner. And then he mustn't also be the silent partner when it comes to the uprising of our kids. And that's where, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as a form of test, that He's actually enabled in that particular regard. So we should be wary from Him. That as long as we dealing fairly as a buyer and seller, then Allah is the silent partner. Allah blesses that particular contract. But the moment the one cheats on the other one or wants to do the other one in, and then Allah exits as a silent partner from the particular contract, and when Allah is not there, that particular void is filled up by the devil. We pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala enable us with the light of this knowledge, and then grant us the ability to practice upon. Barakallahu fikum jami'an. And I think we can conclude now. If Mln Irshad is not on the other side of the line, and then we'll conclude bi'idhnillah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because normally Mln Irshad would feed us some of the questions. But if he's not around, inshallah, bi'idhnillah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we'll conclude now, and we'll meet next week at the same time and same place. Similarly to the Kinder Joy, but without the physical treat, is it permissible to pay to use those 50-cent machines that you will definitely get a toy, but you don't know which toy? To the best of my understanding, that would not be permissible because it is the uncertainty there is very clearly related to an in-rem phenomenon. Brother Salim Hussein, the first question that came through was asking about drop shipping. When we look at Bayu Salam, when you buy something which is described, and then we can talk about it in more detail. The skill testing machine and game arcades, you pay for the opportunity to direct the picking machine but not to get anything. Can we structure as if the fun of the use is a value? That is a type of fun that, wallahu a'lam, that is not a form of fun that the Sharia would permit. And particularly when you're spending money, the Sharia would consider that a frivolous act. It is very interesting also from a Sharia perspective. We're not to say that this is permissible, not permissible, or this is invalid. But it's interesting. Sharia appreciates that there's time that you must let your hair down, and there's times you must take a step back to take 2 steps forwards and so forth. But it's also very interesting to understand what the Sharia considers to be completely frivolous. In other words, the Sharia doesn't add a value to that. And the Sharia would sometimes consider things which we, particularly in a time when, like what comes to mind would be extreme sports, certain extreme sports, because you're placing yourself at risk, which the Sharia doesn't actually look at because it may compromise on the preservation of life as a phenomenon. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. Barakallahu fikum jami'an. And when we do meet again, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.